So the New York Times just released their endorsement for the 2020 Democratic primary and 2020 general election, I believe, because there's no way they're going for Trump. So before I even give you the specifics, just know nobody cares about this. Now, I'm not saying that because I dislike the New York Times, even though I do dislike the New York Times. I'm saying that because some insanely high percentage of the people who they've endorsed have lost. So, it's simply not the case that people are sitting around waiting, holding their breath, saying, who will the New York Times endorse because it will impact my vote? It has no impact whatsoever. Now, that fact mixed with how they rolled this out makes it hilarious. Guys, they turned it into a reality show. They turned it into a reality show on Hulu where they had like all the entire, New York Times editorial board sitting around a conference table, sitting there with their sheets of paper, listening to people talk, listening to the candidates come in and make their case. And they have like their glasses down on their nose and they're saying, yes, I'm very serious. Yes, yes. Listen to what I say. I'm important. It gives you the vibe of like, these people think they're like philosopher kings. Like they think they're, next level genius, the creme de la creme, most intelligent people in the country, and that everybody's sitting around like, what have the philosopher kings told us from the mountaintop? Yes. And nobody cares. I mean, that's not fair. Political Twitter did care, but we cared for comedic reasons. Like, okay, they're making a big thing about this, and they're trying to act like, ooh, are you ready for this? And so they have the show. They try to make it dramatic. They do like a top 4 elimination thing, and then they get down to who they pick. And it was the goofiest decision of all time. They decided to go with Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar. They went with both of them. Now, I'll have some clips later on in the show where you'll see some of the specific stuff that was said from the candidates when they were making their pitch to these guys. Bernie's is hilarious and awesome. He was talking about how I don't bullshit people. If you want me to be the guy to call you on your birthday and say congratulations, happy birthday, I'm not going to do that. But I am going to get you Medicaid for all, and I am going to get you free college, which is classic Bernie, and it's awesome. And then they had Mayor Pete. Surprisingly, they actually had one tough question for him where one of the people was like, you were involved in fixing bread prices. And he was like, no, I was working for a company that had a client where with that one client, maybe not, something happened where we fixed bread prices, but it wasn't me. It was somebody else in the thing. And I just learned about this yesterday. New phone, who dis? So he honestly came across as the Christian Bale in American Psycho on the next level in the scene where, they got the business cards and he's like looking at his buddy's business card. And he's like, it's so perfect with the off-white color and the imprint and it has a watermark. He just seems like a psycho. I mean, he does. I've always said it's either Christian Bale in American Psycho or Joe from You. That's the vibe that Mayor Pete gives. So that was the thing with him. They had Cory Booker in there who they loved, even though he dropped out. They obviously recorded this before he dropped out. But for the Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren pick, somebody needs to explain to the New York Times, bro, that's not how this works. You can't pick 2 candidates. Like, the whole idea is there's going to be an election. You have to pick one to vote for, so give us the one. Now, if the New York Times decided, I'll give you a list as if we had ranked choice voting, that'd be fine. I'd be cool with that. That's them saying, here's the hierarchy as we see it. Totally fine. But they didn't do that. They said Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar. They're endorsing both of them. I mean, that is the cop-out of all cop-outs. For example, there are plenty of people who listen to this show who are Tulsi people and who are Yang people. And, if I was trying to pander to them, I could be like, my number ones are Bernie, Tulsi, and Yang. They're all tied for number 1. But, maybe some people would like that more, but I would be lying to them. I would be BSing them. That's not how I feel. That's not what my actual ranking is. So I'm honest with them. And I say, okay, yeah, so I got Bernie at number 1. Tulsi is ahead of Yang. She's at number 2 because I agree with her more on policy. And then Yang's at number 3. That's honesty. This is like the cop-out of all cop-outs, and it's coming from the paper that's supposed to be the paper of record, where it's all very serious people who work there. I mean, it's ridiculous. But the even more important point is, guys, the two they picked aren't remotely ideologically similar. Now, I know some of you might say, well, hold on, Kyle. Elizabeth Warren just recently made an establishment heel turn, and so maybe her and Klobuchar are similar. Well, I would say to you, even though Elizabeth Warren is nowhere near Bernie Sanders, and she is trying to play both sides of the fence, and she's very comfortable now on the corporate Democrat side. Even though that's the case, sorry, but her record just shows she is not Amy Klobuchar. Amy Klobuchar is the most milquetoast standard corporate Democrat you've ever seen in your entire life. She is a down-the-line corporate Democrat. There's nothing remotely interesting about her. There's nothing remotely edgy about her. There's nothing remotely leftist about her. Elizabeth Warren, at least she has a strong streak of anti-monopoly politics in her. At least she did the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which returned $12 billion to defrauded Americans when big financial institutions ripped them off. At least she's, like, the one issue she seems to care about is, I will actually be tough on Wall Street, and I'm actually pro-regulation, and I'm actually pro-raising taxes on the rich and corporations. Now, for all of her other failures, and there are many, Medicare for all, giant failure. Foreign policy, beyond failure. Elizabeth Warren's a standard corporate Democrat in that realm. But there are some spots of, okay, I'm just different than Amy Klobuchar. The New York Times said, I'm going to endorse both of them when they are polar opposites on 3 or 4 different super important issues. So that the New York Times, talk about not being, intellectual heavyweights. We're talking about people who didn't even bother to care about basic ideological consistency when making this decision. Do you understand how embarrassing that is? That means that the New York Times and their philosopher kings, they know no more than, some random Joe Schmo you might talk to in New Hampshire who decides who he wants to vote for based on his fifis, based on how he feels, based on, the way somebody gives a speech, based on something totally arbitrary and not at all related to policy. That's what the New York Times did here. I'm going to pick 2 ideologically opposed people, and, but they're both corporate enough, and they're both centrist enough, and they're both women, so I get my woke points as well. So, and what they're trying to do is, I want to appease all of my readership. That's what this is. They're smart enough to know, hey man, obviously we're in an anti-establishment era. Obviously, there's this strong feeling of anti-corruption in the country, strong feeling that everything is broken. So we're hedging here and saying, well, Elizabeth Warren, they would say, is kind of like Bernie, but also a woman and younger. So we're going in that direction. And then the Klobuchar move is, hey, all of my hardcore, uber wealthy, elitist, centrist hacks who read this paper, who are most of them who read that paper. This is also a Klobuchar who's as banal as it gets and will change nothing, also her. So this is like appeasing the readership 101. And now in terms of Bernie, their argument against him, they had a few. One of them was, well, he doesn't know how to get stuff done. My dudes, there's a nickname for him in D.C. He's called the Amendment King. He got more amendments through than anybody. Warren Gunnels, his policy advisor, famously tweeted out a list of his accomplishments, and the goddamn thing is endless. It's endless. Now, not only does he get stuff done from within the system, he also gets stuff done from outside of the system. This is a guy who got Amazon workers a living wage, $15 living wage, Disney workers a $15 living wage. He's on picket lines. He has an outside-inside approach to change, and it's the most effective version of it. And also, he just worked together with Mike Lee, hardcore Republican senator, to end the genocide in Yemen, our support of the genocide in Yemen, and Trump vetoed that. He can't control Donald Trump. He can only do what he could do, and he succeeded in getting it through. So for them to say, oh, he doesn't know how to work with people, that's just not true. That's that lazy standard establishment talking point when they're trying to throw something at Bernie, but there's no there. There's no merit there. There's no meat to that substance. They're just dead wrong when they say that. And then the other thing they say is, and this one really pissed me off, why replace one overpromising bomb thrower with another? So in other words, Donald Trump is an overpromising bomb thrower. Now hold on. You say overpromising, I say psychopathic. Like, yeah, sometimes he said some nominally anti-war stuff, anti-interventionist stuff. He did some populist rhetoric on the campaign show about how I'm going to keep your jobs here. In terms of what he's actually done, standard establishment Republican, agrees totally with the neocons on foreign policy now, save one issue, North Korea, but all the other issues, just standard establishment Republican. On the economy, George W. Bush on steroids. I mean, he did, the Trump tax cuts or the Bush tax cuts on steroids. That's what they are. 83% of the tax cuts go to the top 1%, deregulating Wall Street, destroying the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, wages still stagnant. The list goes on and on. 7 million people lost their health insurance because of his executive orders against Obamacare. So this is who he is. That's not an overpromising bomb thrower. That's a pro-establishment goon. And Bernie, somebody on Twitter said it best. They said, that's like saying, we shouldn't replace, an overpromising arsonist with an overpromising firefighter. That's what the New York Times is effectively saying. And it's like, well, no, that's exactly what you should do. There's an arsonist, you get the firefighters there, you put out the fire. And they don't see it. They believe in horseshoe theory. Horseshoe theory is, well, the far right and the far left are effectively the same, and therefore Trump and Bernie are the same because they're both overpromising bomb throwers, even though their agendas are diametrically opposed. Diametrically opposed. You can't get agendas that are more opposed. Bernie Sanders is a tried and true social democrat, FDR style. That's what he is. Donald Trump is a standard establishment Republican. That's what he is. So to act like, well, they're the same. The New York Times editorial board is like a dog. They only sense tone. So Trump gets out there and he yells at his rallies, and they're like, oh my God, he's yelling. Bernie gets out there and he yells at his rallies, and they're, oh my God, he's yelling. They're the same. Except one person is telling you I was going to kick your grandma off Social Security and make her be homeless, and the other one is saying we're going to expand Social Security and make sure everybody has a roof over their head. Yeah, they're both yelling, but the substance is totally different. So, this is embarrassing. But if you ever needed further proof that the establishment, the wealthy liberal elites are out of touch, you couldn't get better proof than this. It doesn't get more out of touch than this, because it's also incoherent. It's out of touch, but it's also incoherent, because it makes no sense what they did. So, now they didn't learn anything, man. From 2016, they didn't learn anything. It's like they've never talked to anybody outside of their own wealthy liberal elite bubble. That's the sense I get. And it's just amazing and fascinating that they could be this out of touch at this late date. So, this was useless. But I want to be clear, man, even if they weren't going to do it. But even in the 1 in a million that they said, we're going to endorse Bernie Sanders, I still don't think I'd care, because these are not actual leaders. These people are not indicative of anything outside of their own little bubble. You got Brett Stevens at the New York Times, David Brooks. I don't know if they were involved in this endorsement thing, but, you got all these other writers in there. And it's like, you guys think you're so much smarter than you are. And you think you're so important. But, you're just not. So even if they had endorsed Bernie, I'd be out here going, I don't think it's going to have that much of an impact, because it's not. Pramila Jayapal, Representative Pramila Jayapal, who I love. She's a great lefty congresswoman. She just endorsed Bernie Sanders. Do I think that's going to change the race? Not at all. I don't think the overwhelming majority of people know who Pramila Jayapal is. That's nothing against her. I'm just saying sometimes endorsements are overrated. I think the only endorsements that really have an impact, and even then it's a tiny impact, is like an A+++ list celebrity. Because, the super top of the line celebrities have some people who are just so sycophantic to them that it's like, hey, I'll vote for whoever the hell you tell me to. But outside of that, it's really nothing. Like, there's not much that goes into it. And maybe you could say some strategic endorsements that mobilize others, like unions, for example. That might have a little bit more of an impact. But by and large, as a general rule, endorsements are not the end-all, be-all, and they're not as important as everybody makes them out to be. And the New York Times couldn't have proved any clearer that they're super irrelevant at this late date.